Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scripps Research, fully interactive resources for students and teachers or FIRST. My name is Rosie Alvaran-Seckler, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. For those who are joining us for the first time, Scripps Research is one of the largest nonprofit private biomedical research institutes in the nation, and our mission is to develop the next generation of medicines and diagnostics to address the most pressing health concerns in the world, such as COVID-19. For those who are joining us again, welcome back. I'd like to welcome everybody to the new summer series titled Careers in Biomedical Research. Our goal with this new series is to expose some of the different career paths available to students like you who are passionate about biology and chemistry and science in general and curious about research, especially in an academic setting. We will use the term academia often, and that's what we mean. We hope you can get some insights by learning about the daily work lives of our scientists and their journeys to where they are now. And without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's presentation, Sarah Mosure. She's a third-year graduate student on the Florida campus of Scripps Research with joint appointments in the laboratories of Drs. Stolt and Coyotin. She obtained her bachelor's degree in molecular and cellular biology from the University of Connecticut in 2017. And today she will be talking about her experience in grad school and her career journey so far. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. As Rosie said, my name is Sarah. I'm a third-year graduate student here at the Scripps Research Graduate Program in Jupiter, Florida. And today I'll be talking about what is a PhD in the biomedical sciences, and I'll be addressing some points that you might consider when thinking about whether graduate school might be right for you. Now, just to start with an overview of what exactly graduate school is, you're probably familiar with an undergraduate degree in biology, chemistry, or related field, which is typically 4 years, at the end of which you'll have your bachelor's degree. Now, with your bachelor's degree, there are a number of career opportunities available to you, some of which I have listed here. However, this is far from an exhaustive list. If you're interested in other alternatives, you can reach out to us or look online. There are plenty of resources available. But like I said, these are just some examples. The one I'm most familiar with is the technician position here, and this can either be in an academic lab or in an industry lab. And typically as a technician, you'll be working day to day in the lab, doing experiments, analyzing data, usually working under a professor or a manager or director. So this is a great position if you love working in the lab and you want to be doing experiments every day. So certainly there are career opportunities available to bachelor's degrees in the biomedical sciences. However, if you're interested in getting more specialized expertise or taking on more responsibilities in the biomedical sciences, you might consider a doctoral or master's degree. And so the first one I'll address here is the master's degree. It's typically a 2-year education. You'll take a number of classes, or in some programs you'll present a thesis, but it's much shorter than a doctoral program. And at the end of this, you'll have a number of career opportunities available to you that were not available to you as a bachelor's degree, including more senior positions, so senior scientist positions in academia or industry, which typically require more responsibilities, but also usually more pay. And there are a number of other opportunities in other biomedical careers, such as educating, writing, or counseling, that also become available to you with a master's degree. As I mentioned, the other graduate degree is the doctoral degree. This is also known as a PhD. It's typically a 5-year program, so longer than the master's degree, and it's involves more rigorous training in your specific field so that you can develop a really specialized expertise that makes you qualified to be a senior scientist or director in industry, staff scientist or professor in academia, as well as other roles in other biomedical sectors. Now, in these positions, you're not going to be doing nearly as much hands-on lab work. You're not really going to be running experiments. Instead, you're going to be overseeing a lab, applying for grants, overseeing entire programs, and so you have a much more supervisory role as a PhD in biomedical sciences. And so just to sum all of that up, essentially graduate school involves rigorous training in the biomedical sciences in order to develop the expertise that you need for more specialized or upper level positions in academia, industry, or other sectors of biomedical science. Now you might be wondering what exactly a PhD requires, and so from here on out I'll mostly be discussing PhD, even that is the program that I'm enrolled in. So first, you'll need to select a mentor. So within your first year, you'll try out different labs, different mentors, see how you like the mentorship that they give and see how you like the experiments and the science in that lab. After this time, you will officially select a mentor and continue to work on your classes. Classes only go through the first or second year, so a lot fewer classes than an undergraduate education or even a master's in most cases. So majority of your time is going to be spent in the lab, doing science, running experiments, this kind of thing. Now, once you select a mentor and pass your classes, you'll then need to select a thesis committee, also known as an advisory committee. And this is a panel of 3 or 4 professors who, in addition to your mentor, will help oversee your graduate education. So they will determine whether you're making sufficient progress by having meetings with you and your mentor, and they'll determine essentially whether in the end you have passed your PhD exams and can get your PhD. So this is a really important committee to select. Somewhere in your second year, you'll need to present a proposal on the experiments you plan to do for your PhD. And this is known as a qualifying exam. After you pass this, you become a PhD candidate. And then from there on out, you're doing no more courses and you're focusing exclusively on doing your research, as well as some professional and career development and writing up your research until finally around your 5th or 6th year, you'll give a presentation on your research, and this is known as the thesis defense. And this is essentially when you graduate with your PhD. Now, this sounds like a lot of work, and it is a good deal of work. However, if you really love science, it doesn't really feel like work. So when considering whether graduate school might be right for you, maybe think less about the amount of work that you have to do and more about whether you are deeply curious about scientific problems or you love learning new things. So if this sounds like you, then probably you would really enjoy a graduate education and it wouldn't feel so much like work. And this kind of overlaps with working long hours. I think it's kind of notorious that scientists and graduate students work long hours, and we do, but no one's chaining us to the bench for the most part, and we really enjoy being there. We're there because we want to see the next result. We want to do more experiments and publish really good science. So be aware, though, that graduate school and scientific careers typically require working a lot more than the typical 9-to-5 job. Related to being curious about scientific problems, even if you're new to science, you're not really even sure about, what scientific problems you might be interested in. If you just really love being challenged, you love doing puzzles, solving problems, then this could probably translate really well into being a successful scientist. As a PhD, I mentioned you take on a more supervisor role. You're not necessarily doing the day-to-day experiments. You're overseeing the people in your lab who are doing the day-to-day experiments. And so you really have to enjoy mentoring and training and or supervising others, because that is a good majority of what you'll be doing. However, there are also some PhD roles that require just a specific specialized expertise. And so for these kind of roles, you wouldn't necessarily need to oversee others, but for the most part, you will be in a leadership position. And finally, you should really enjoy reading and writing. I spend a good amount of my time reading research literature, and even if, research literature to you right now seems daunting, there seems to be a lot of jargon in these papers. Once you get this hang of it, it is, just as enjoyable as reading a good novel sometimes. You're excited to see what results that paper published and if they might relate to your own research and so on. And then also, of course, writing, you have to write papers to publish your results. You also have to apply for fellowships and grants. So there's a good amount of both reading and writing in graduate school. So you should probably at least enjoy these two things. Now, just to switch gears a bit and tell you a bit about my path to how I decided to enroll in a PhD program. I entered my undergraduate career originally wanting to go to medical school, so I was pre-med, and as a pre-medical student, they recommended that we try out undergraduate research, and this was essentially how I came to experience undergraduate research. I volunteered in 2 different labs at UConn, where I was a molecular and cell biology major. One was a fruit fly genetics lab, and the other was a liver fibrosis lab. And I really love working in both of those labs. I think having both experiences allowed me to compare the different techniques and ones that, the research that I was more interested in doing. So I think as an undergraduate, it really is in your best interest to try out a lot of different things just to figure out what you like best. And then I also took advantage of the research fellowships and funding opportunities at my undergraduate institution, as well as poster exhibitions, so opportunities to present my research either in poster format or oral exhibitions. So I definitely would encourage you all, if you're thinking about this career, to try these things out and see how you like it. I'll add that my coursework mostly encompassed science and math. As a biomedical science career, you really have to focus on these 2 fields, particularly the science field. So again, related to enjoying reading and writing, you should also probably enjoy science and math. And then finally, after working in these labs and never actually getting around to volunteering in hospitals or anything, I realized that a career in research better suited me and my interests than a career as a medical doctor. Now, I'd worked in 2 labs, as I mentioned, at UConn, but I was also interested in maybe trying out the research at other institutes, and this is something I highly recommend if you're interested in pursuing a PhD that you do, even if maybe you aren't interested in the research that goes on at your undergraduate institution. There are opportunities to go and try out research at other institutes, and so some of these programs include the National Science Foundation, or NSF, Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship. So I applied to this program, and that's how I ended up at Scripps, Florida. I actually worked in a structural biology lab, and so this kind of research, structural biology, which looks at the 3D molecular structure of protein, was totally new to me, and so this was a great opportunity to get exposed to something totally different than I'd ever learned about before, and I ended up being really excited about this kind of research. And so I continued my internship via the academic year research internship for undergraduates, which is offered at Scripps, Florida. And this allowed me to continue working in that lab, working on that project, and really learn more about structural biology. And ultimately, I ended up matriculating here at the Scripps Research graduate program. And so that's how I got here. Now, during my rotations, as I mentioned, graduate students will have to try out several different labs. Not only had I already worked in that structural biology lab, I also tried out a few others, including an immunology lab that works on similar proteins, just in a different context, more in the biology context as opposed to the structural context. And I imagined how I could create a joint project between these 2 fields, and that's exactly what I did, and that's why I have co-mentors. I have 2 mentors. This is actually kind of unusual and fairly unique to Scripps, where we are very interdisciplinary. And so I'm combining immunology techniques as well as structural biology techniques in order to better understand autoimmune disease and identify new avenues for therapeutic development for these diseases. Now, my overarching goals in pursuing this thesis project is, 1, to become an expert in structure and function of the factors that regulate immunity. So that is the structural biology and the immunology. To become proficient in designing and performing experiments in these 2 fields, as well as analyzing those data. And then beyond just my own education, another important goal of a PhD is to produce data that will advance knowledge in my field by publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And this is the gold standard for gauging scientists or PhD success, is publishing scientific literature in peer-reviewed journals. And so just to give you guys an overview of what my day-to-day life is like, so you can get an idea of what it's like being a graduate student and reflect on whether you might enjoy doing these similar things. My day-to-day involves reading research articles, and this never changes. In fact, it probably becomes even more once you graduate and become a professor or director, something like this. Reading what other people have published to find out whether they can apply to my own experiments, as well as just generally understanding my field better. Then, as I said, applying what I read to my own experiments, designing them in the best way possible, performing them, trying to make sure I have all the proper controls for my experiments. Then after performing the experiments, it's very important to document what I've done so that anyone could go back and repeat and see what I did. This is a very important part of science, as well as analyzing the results and presenting them in a way that other scientists could understand. I say linear thinking, given that a PhD is a doctorate in philosophy. It's a doctorate in thinking. So essentially, we're learning how to think about science and come up with new ideas in our scientific field. And then I have a few other things here. I teach class, well, teach assistant. I'm a teaching assistant for some classes. So once you finish your classes, you have the opportunity to then try to teach new students. And so this is related to eventually becoming a professor. It's good training for that, which you'll be training undergraduates or graduate students as a professor. I also participate in group discussions about my own data or other people's data, and we discuss research articles quite frequently among graduate students and professors. I also attend and present at research seminars, conferences, so science is very collaborative, and you have to be willing to share your research with others, communicate it in a way that others could understand, as well as think about new ways that other techniques could be applied to your research. And so with that, you may be aware that science can be a very challenging field at times, and it's important to stay motivated given that your experiments day to day might not work. You might experience a period where none of the results you expected are coming, and you might start to feel really down, which is why I think it's really important to maintain a good work-life balance. And I think it really is feasible to do with a PhD. We live here in Jupiter, Florida, and so I have a picture of the beach. It feels really great after a stressful day to just go to the beach and unwind. So it's important to have outlets, healthy outlets to release stress, exercise, things like this. And then of course, friends and family. It's always good to have a good support system who you can rely on and can understand your problems. I have here my cats. They're my best companions. They keep me motivated, keep me entertained, help me with puzzles and so on. So it's always good to have a good support system and maintain a good work-life balance. So with that, I'll wrap up and take any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Thank you again for that great presentation. I think it was a great picture of what is graduate school and one example of what you can do to get into a great program. And Sarah, we have the first question here. Is there a certain track undergraduates have to take to pursue a PhD similar to pre-med or pre-law?
So for a PhD in the biomedical sciences, I think the most logical track is biology, chemistry, physics, something like this. I would say as long as you take your core classes, you could potentially also do something like pre-law, because there are some biomedical PhDs who then do also pursue a law degree, and then you can work in biomedical industry, say on pharmaceutical patents. That's one career path. I would say as I just said, as long as you take your core biology classes and chemistry classes, you should be good to take or to pursue a biomedical PhD.
Great. Well, we'll get more questions. Maybe I can ask one question. You spoke about engaging in undergraduate internships or research experiences. How do you go about finding those experiences and maybe reaching out to the faculty and so on?
Right. Yeah. So for me, I search online. You can search, most universities have lists of undergraduate fellowship opportunities. And then, different funding agencies such as NSF on their website. They also have their Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, the SURF program that I mentioned. That's on their website, and you can find out details there. Yeah, I think that sums that up.
Great. So the next question, hello, Sarah. Thank you for sharing with us. Do you think it will be beneficial to gain experience in the field before going into a PhD program?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things they look for, particularly at more competitive institutes, is if you've tried out working in labs. Like I said, I volunteered in several different labs. I think this is important not only for getting experience so that you can kind of hit the ground running when you start your PhD, but it's also good to find out whether research is right for you. I mean, it's kind of one of those things you don't know if you like it until you try it. So at the very least, you should at least give it a try. And if your institute does not have undergraduate research, like I said, you can look for these summer internships, like the NSF Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, in order to go to a different institute for a summer.
Great. So next question, if you're considering a few majors for PhD but cannot decide, what is your advice for that? I am interested in microbiology, biochemistry, or biomedical engineering, and I'm about to graduate with a bachelor's in biomedical engineering and like the biotechnology, drug delivery, cell engineering side.
Yeah, I think, your major maybe doesn't matter so much as long as you take, the core classes to meet your major requirements, and then any additional classes that might meet your interests. So if those are the things that you're interested in, you could definitely take those courses, whether or not they meet your primary major course requirements. I think for a PhD, the exact courses don't matter terribly as long as you meet the core requirements, like taking core biology, chemistry courses, things like this. A lot of the things, technical things, you learn during your PhD.
Great. Next question. If a graduate school does not have a specific biomedical program, what other programs are good to look at? Not sure the meaning exactly of this question, but yeah.
Right. So so maybe like if you're looking just for biomedical, I mean, even at Scripps, we don't have a biomedical PhD. There are, say immunology PhDs, there are, chemistry PhDs, and then these all kind of fall under the umbrella of biomedical science. Scripps is really interesting because we don't even have necessarily specific tracks. Everyone falls under the umbrella of chemical and biological sciences. So I graduate with a chemical and biological science PhD, not necessarily, immunology or structural biology PhD.
Great. So the next question, what was your experience applying to the program with multiple background research experiences?
Yeah, I think it really helped me figure out, what exactly I wanted to study, having tried out several different labs. For example, I found out that, I probably didn't want to work with fruit flies. I really enjoyed my time in that lab, but working in that lab at least helped me figure out that's not what I wanted to do for my PhD. I think you can also be very successful working in one lab, start to finish. though often schools will like to see that you've at least tried out a different lab, either through a summer internship or otherwise. Again, because it helps them see that you've at least tried out science and seen a few different options.
Great. So the next question, what about students interested in pursuing a PhD in public health? Will this still be a science-based track, and should you do as much lab work? How would you recommend students interested in public health approach undergraduate research? Do you have any experience on this?
I don't really have experience in public health, but I would imagine you don't need as many of the, core technical classes. I would imagine public health is more related to epidemiology and statistics, something like this. But again, I guess I'm not exactly an expert in this, so maybe someone else would be able to give a better reply.
Okay. Next question, what does your day-to-day in the lab look like?
Yeah, so every day I'm doing some combination of performing experiments, either setting something up for something that's, say, a multi-day experiment. I'm analyzing data, so, going in Excel or plotting the data in programs so that I can present it. Attending class, I said I'm a teaching assistant, so I will sit in on classes and make sure students are participating, and then maybe grade exams, things like this. I also actively mentor other people in the lab. So as I mentioned, be getting your PhD. It's helpful if you enjoy mentoring others, and of course this is something you can learn to do as you're getting your PhD. You'll train the more junior members of the lab, including new students, new lab members, undergraduate students, things like this. So that pretty much sums up my day today.
Great. I love this next question. Hello, I am wondering, when you are entering graduate school, what was your biggest fear that later turned out to be unfounded? Did you ever worry that you would not be able to keep up?
Yeah, for sure. I actually was concerned that I wouldn't like to read as much. When you first start reading scientific papers, it's hard. It's really hard because you don't know any of the jargon, all of the technical terms that are in that paper. So it can feel like reading gibberish a lot of the times, and it can make you feel really dumb. But, you just got to stick with it and keep reading, keep talking to people and trying to learn from others. And then eventually it becomes easy. And as I said, well, maybe not easy, but it becomes easier. And then, as I said, it can actually become exciting. You're reading through this paper and it feels really good to suddenly then understand what, this figure means, or, what they're trying to show, and then actually even be able to find criticisms in their research. So I would say this is something you can absolutely learn, and not to be reluctant about it. And yeah, so I'd say that was one of my fears going into school.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that was a great question, and probably one question that a lot of students who are looking into applying to the PhD program have. So the next question, do you have any advice for someone who's interested in an MSTP, MD, PhD program?
Yeah, in originally pursuing or thinking I wanted to go to medical school, I considered medical school and then an MD, PhD, and then finally settled on PhD. So I can speak to that transition period. I guess, when you get an MD, PhD, from what I understand, you ultimately have to choose one or the other. Are you going to be primarily research-based, or are you going to be primarily clinical? And I think you can do research as just an MD. And so basically what one or the other adds to each other is, say, if you do decide you just want to do PhD type work, you just want to run a lab, the MD would then add a clinical perspective to your work. And then if you do decide to mostly be clinical, a PhD would essentially teach you how to think. So if you also did some small amount of research as an MD, then you would have the education and understanding how to set up experiments, how to write papers, things like this. But I think it's definitely a very challenging career path. So more power to you if you can pursue that one.
Great. So the next question is, do you have any advice on applying to NSF Serve RU programs?
Yeah, so of course, having some research experience always helps, but you know, part of the reason these programs exist is for people who don't have any to get opportunities to do some research. So if you can really emphasize how passionate you are about science, if you can try to read about the science that some of the professors at that institute do, and you know, just do your best to try to come up with thoughtful statements or questions about their research in your research statement. You know, talk about what motivates you to pursue science. A lot of people will reference relatives in their family who had diseases, and this is one option, but it also can really help to just say, you know, you love doing puzzles, you love solving problems, and you think this could translate really well into a science career. So all the things essentially that, you know, would help you get into graduate school also might help you get into these summer fellowship programs. And then of course, I'd say Rosie also is a great resource to talk to about that, since she does so much for the SURF program here.
And we will share the link to the website that has my contact information and others if you have any questions after the webinar. Thank you for that. I see that there are no more questions and we are approaching 10 past the hour. So maybe it's a good time for wrapping up. Do you have any final thoughts, Sarah, to share with the students before finalizing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of you are college students. If you're entering college or, you know, going through your career, don't be afraid to talk to professors. That was one thing I wish I did more. Talk to them about their career paths, even if, you know, you don't have any necessarily science to talk about, although that would be great too. Just keep asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions is, I'd say, the number
Great.
one.
That's great advice to finalize. Thank you so much again for doing this today. I think you gave, again, a great picture on what graduate school is all about and a lot of insight to the students. And for, like I said in the beginning, the title of this series is Careers in Biomedical Research. So we hope you join us again for future webinars. And we hope also with these series to open a window a little bit to academia and the kind of career paths that you can take in our world. Thank you so much for joining today, and I'll see you next time.